Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am so excited to be doing another makeup history video. I know it's been a while since I did my last one, and my goal basically with these videos is to do at least one a month. And so many things happened and I wasn't able to get this video where I wanted it to be at, but I finally was able to get my thoughts together, construct an outline, just get all the information that I wanted to present this video's topic to you guys. Today we're going to be talking about the French makeup during the 18th century, specifically makeup that was worn in the court of Versailles. This was basically where the French nobility, the French monarchy was headquartered, if you will, and this is where we had the biggest display of opulence, of just excess and of wealth, perhaps in all of Europe. And what's really interesting is that all of this opulence, all of this just grandeur, all of this just way of living came to a screeching halt in 1789 when the French Revolution broke out. But up until that point, it's really fascinating to look back at this just beautiful time in history where you have such this interesting juxtaposition between really just wealthy and just affluent noblemen and noblewomen, and then you have really just poor and quite unfortunate majority of people that didn't even have enough money to live like they should have been living, so you have this really just interesting just discrepancy in economy and in living situations in 18th century France in particular. And it's really interesting, I think, looking at specifically the beauty regimen and especially the fashion. But today we're going to be talking about the beauty regimen in Versailles during the 18th century, because you really see such an almost ostentatious display of pomp and ceremony and wealth and privilege, and it's really interesting to look at. So we're going to be talking about that today, and I'm also going to be touching briefly, well, maybe not so briefly, on Marie Antoinette, because I feel like she is definitely somebody that we as a society today are very, very familiar with. She was the last queen of France, and it's really interesting because I feel like her way of living and just her mannerisms and her habits and just her lifestyle in general was an opportunity, or was a vehicle towards her just execution later on in the century. First of all, I feel like it's very important to talk about Versailles. Versailles was a palace, and it is a palace that was built by Louis XIV, and he was known as the Sun King because of his love of grandeur, just display and opulence. And he dreamt of Versailles as a palace at which all of Europe would be looking at with just awe. He saw Versailles as his dream palace, and also as a way for him to just establish himself and his country as a leading component of the entire European monarchy, or European group of monarchies. Looking at Versailles today, you see an example of just his just ambition and his love of wealth and just art and just beauty. So if you fast forward to when Marie Antoinette and her husband were the monarchs of France, you have Versailles as something that was a symbol of French elegance, of French excess, and basically of French nobility. Versailles was considered the epicenter of French style, French fashion, French beauty trends, and Marie Antoinette, much like the celebrities of today, was considered to be a trendsetter. So people looked to her, all of these people in Versailles and even beyond looked at Marie Antoinette as the symbol of what they wanted to be. So she was a trendsetter, and her beauty regimen and her fashion was followed just precisely because she was considered the epitome epitome of what it was to be like just in fashion. So it was kind of similar to what we talked about when I did the Queen Elizabeth video, Queen Elizabeth I. Marie Antoinette, in a very similar way, was considered to be the epitome of what fashion and beauty was at the time. When Marie Antoinette became Queen of France and when she started occupying Versailles in that role, Versailles was incredibly overcrowded. There were so many people there, and I mean, Versailles was the place to be in France, and it was the place to be from a lot of Europeans' standpoints. So Versailles was in general very crowded, and it was to the point that there were not even enough just restrooms or just places for people to relieve themselves in Versailles. And so you had this like just terrible issue of overcrowding, and also you had people, basically like so many people, stuck in this palace, and many of them didn't even bathe or practice the hygiene that we consider as normal today. So essentially, Versailles stank. So a great deal of Marie Antoinette's beauty habits and rituals involved scent. She actually had a lot of just beautiful flowers in her rooms. She loved being surrounded by like this like just nice like just smell, likely to sort of mask the stench that Versailles was basically sitting in. In addition to the flowers, she had many scented oils and perfume sachets, and she had several perfumers on call to make sure that she was always surrounded by a nice smell. Apparently, she preferred orange blossom, lemon, rose, lavender, and violet scents in her rooms as well. Similarly to other points in history, at this time, it was very, very in fashion to have a light complexion. In fact, it was quite easy to differentiate between classes. Presumably, if you were part of the working class, you would have a darker complexion from just generally being out in the sun and trying to provide for your family. However, if you were part of the more affluent, more noble kind of just class, you were expected to have a very light complexion. You were supposed to just like convey this sense of delicateness, and that was what Marie Antoinette really just strove to emulate. And what's really interesting is that she also had a facial cleansing routine to preserve this like perfected, whitened sort of skin. So apparently she used a recipe that was later published in 1833 in this book called The Toilette of Health, Beauty, and Fashion. This recipe was apparently popularized by Danish women, and it included the juice of water lilies, melons, cucumbers, and lemons, as well as the crumbs of French rolls, white wine, and stewed pigeons. So you would basically just like wash your face with this concoction, and then after this, Marie Antoinette would tone her skin with a substance called the eau des charmes, which was made of drops excluded by grapevines in May. And then she also had her face mask, which is still popular in France today, and it's basically meant, or it's supposed to give you a fresh, glowing complexion. And this recipe included 2 teaspoons of circulation-stimulating cognac, 1/3 a cup of cell-renewing dry milk powder, brightening lemon juice, and 1 egg white. By the way, I am quoting from an article that I will link down below, along with all the information that I sourced for this entire video, as well as the links for all the photos and clips that are going to be in this video as well. Let's broaden our view and talk about cosmetics and the entire kind of beauty looks that were popular during the 18th century in France. Now, during this period, both men and women wore makeup, and people had a variety of different reasons for wearing makeup in the first place. So back to what I said about having lighter skin and how it made you look like you were from a higher class. Well, people from a higher class or a higher status would basically be using substances to make their skin look and appear just white and just almost translucent. In addition to this, makeup had some practical aims as well. Now, this was the point in history where we still hadn't necessarily established proper hygienic practices that we have now today. In addition to this, we had a lot of diseases that we still were not necessarily understanding of. So one of these diseases was smallpox. Now, almost everybody would have smallpox at some point in their life, particularly when they were children. So if you had smallpox, you were very lucky, of course, to get out of it alive. But in addition to this, almost everybody who was stricken with smallpox did end up with scarring on their skin, particularly their face. So makeup was a way for people to, again, establish their just position in society, but it was also a way for people to cover up the effects of this dangerous disease that was so common during this time period. And back to the French monarchy, the painting of the face or the application of cosmetics was actually considered part of the public toilette. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but it's French and I haven't really been brushing up on my French skills lately. But this was considered an informal ceremony where an aristocratic woman dressed her face and hair before an elect audience. So back to Marie Antoinette and members of the French monarchy. It was actually considered one of the highest forms of entertainment if you were a French aristocrat to basically go into, say, the private apartments of Marie Antoinette and to literally be part of a group of people and watch her apply her makeup. So that was called the public toilet, and I feel like that really just represents how just like focused Versailles was on this sense of pomp and ceremony. The fact that there was an audience, if you were Marie Antoinette, there was an audience for you every single morning when you applied your makeup. So that's kind of interesting to talk about as well. Let's talk about the makeup in general. So at this time, it was considered very much in style to wear thick layers of white, shiny paint on your face and just general skin. So this was of course meant to make your skin look a little bit whiter. It was also meant to act as a way for you to cover your scars if you had smallpox. So the problem was with this white paint is that it contained toxic amounts of lead. So back to the previous videos I've made on makeup history, if you remember the video that I created that was focused on Queen Elizabeth and the makeup that was worn during her time, yes, there were toxic amounts of white lead in that kind of makeup as well. And at this time, several centuries later, you still had people use lead and other poisonous ingredients in their makeup to basically make themselves look more attractive, but these ingredients were literally slowly destroying their health. And there was actually this woman by the name of Kitty Fisher, and she was from England, but she was considered to be a famous English beauty, and she died in 1767 at the age of 23 from lead poisoning. So this was just one example of one of the consequences of having such poisonous ingredients in your makeup. In addition to this white paint, something that was also very much in style would be to use copious amounts of rouge to create the look of like just really vivid, bright red cheeks. So this would be applied in a circular motion on your cheeks. So you basically have white paint, you have like these red cheeks, and they were basically supposed to give you like this like very youthful, healthy appearance. And members of the French aristocracy were known for being really liberal with their application of rouge. Rouge is something that we now consider to be very similar to blush, and there were a variety of ingredients that you could use to make your own rouge. And something that I found very, very interesting was that a lot of these ingredients were sourced from vegetables. Now, vegetables that you could use for rouge included safflower, wood resin, sandalwood, and Brazil wood. So these vegetables would then be mixed with creams, greases, or vinegars to create a certain kind of paste. And if you were a lady of the court, you would apply a certain amount of rouge to your cheeks and also to your lips to create like this beautiful like rose rosy kind of like cheeks and lip appearance. In addition to this, lips could also be reddened with the application of vinegar or even distilled alcohol. So depending on what was in at that time, you would have lip colors ranging from pinks to corals to even dark red at some points during this century. And if you think about what I said earlier about how common smallpox was, well, people would actually try and cover up their smallpox scars with the aid of beauty patches, or as they were called, mouches. Again, that's French. Not very good at French at the moment. But these were basically like just patches that could be made from fabrics such as taffeta or velvet, and you would basically glue these like literal like just circular patches on your face. Sometimes they would be circular, other times they could be different shapes depending on what you wanted, and apparently you would keep them in like a little box on your vanity, and you could just like basically apply them to wherever you felt like you wanted to cover any kind of imperfection, be it a blemish, be it a smallpox scar, or just any kind of like just pimple. You would cover it up with the application of this beauty spot. Eyes were pretty much left almost completely bare at this time, but eyebrows were considered to be very attractive if you had like relatively full eyebrows. So people would darken their eyebrows using soot, or they would just apply fake eyebrows, sometimes made from mouse fur. So little by little towards the end of the 18th century, you have this increasingly ostentatious display of wealth and of excess and just like flamboyance just in general, to the point that in 1871 French women reportedly used more than 2 million pots of rouge in 1 year. Unfortunately for the French monarchy, towards the end of the century in 1789 the French Revolution began, and this was known actually as one of the bloodiest revolutions in European history. And I think that, I mean, I'm going to talk about the revolution for a little bit because I feel like it's rather important when you talk about historical context. I think that like Marie Antoinette especially and other members of the French monarchy, what's really interesting is that they were components of a system that made it next to impossible for the common people of France to just necessarily have any sort of opportunity for advancement or for bettering their lives. Because we look back at this like just era of just pomp and excess, and we look at it with like a certain degree of like just reverence, and we have different movies and different sources just like glamorizing this like just display of French style and beauty and just art, and I love looking at that part of history. I think it's just beautiful to see like the different just pieces of art and culture that we can glean from this area, from this point in history, but at the same time I feel like it's really important to look back at this time and recognize that when these individuals when these members of the French elite were living so lavishly, there were people, the majority of the French people, who had next to nothing. And unfortunately, because of this like just giant discrepancy in opportunity, in wealth, in just lifestyles, you had the French Revolution. And I mean, strangely enough, I mean, you look at French history and it's kind of like they got the revolution, and then unfortunately the French people were thrown into arguably greater disarray with another form of government that again basically leached off of the common people. So that was me sort of like veering away from makeup in that particular instance. But yeah, I do feel like it's important with this series to just inject a little bit of historical context to really give you a little bit more of a fully rounded view of what basically living in this era was. I feel like looking back, it's really just, we are very lucky to have the benefit of being able to see a greater picture, because I highly doubt that any member of nobility or just of this elite, like just wealthy society in France was able to get such a fully rounded view of what was really going on and how different their lives were from the lives of others. And I think it's really important actually to take that information and to look at what we have right now and to basically appreciate that wherever we are in life, there are always other people that definitely do not have it as nice as we may do. And so that kind of inspires me to maybe like devote a little bit more of my time and energy to perhaps helping other people and to making the world a better place. So I don't necessarily get caught up in this sort of like world of privilege, because I think that me, like living in this era right now, I am quite privileged. I am quite lucky in many regards. And I think that it's important to recognize that I am so very lucky to be living the way I'm living and to have the opportunities that I do, and it's important to help others. So with that note, I think I'm gonna end this video. That was basically my lengthy video on makeup during the 18th century in France in the court of Versailles, and specifically pertaining to Marie Antoinette. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and found it interesting. Let me know what you think of what I was saying in this video down in the comments. And also give this video a like if you want to see more historic kind of history of makeup videos on my channel, perhaps with a dash of historical context as well. I really just enjoy doing these videos. I've also just had like an entire list of topics I want to cover specifically pertaining to makeup history, and I'm kind of like trying to decide what topics I want to cover next. So of course, if you want to see more of these videos, there's a playlist up in the cards where I have just placed all the different videos that I've done on this topic. And of course, if you want to see more of my videos, you can always subscribe. I post videos every single day, and they range from makeup history, and I also post makeup tutorials. I talk about makeup in the here and now, and I just am obsessed in general with colorful makeup. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye guys.